Thank you, Henrik, for the technical introduction. Thank you to the speakers, and welcome to the speakers and to the guests, to the audience today for this very important topic about how can governments and platforms work together. And we have the pleasure and have to say thank you that Mr. Erik Bergkvist is the host today. And thank you that you are so active as a board member of SME Connect and that you bring in the regional level for SMEs, this perspective. We have to be always aware that over 95% of SMEs are only active in the regions. So so regions are the key if you're speaking about SMEs. 3% are active in the internal market and only 1% in the national market and 1% in the internal market. So you can see how important this is if we're speaking about SMEs, if we're going really to the bottom. And the next pleasure we have is the first time Francis Fitzgerald, member of the European Parliament, member of Econ and FEM. Thank you very much. Again, welcome to our webinar. And thank you that you have time for us to discuss this important topic. And we have also very interesting keynotes today. First, my good friend Florian Hartleb. He is from Bavaria, but now based in Tallinn. He's an expert for e-government affairs and author for many books, and also expert in fake news and fighting extremism. So thank you that you have time today. Then Krasimir Simonski, Deputy Chairperson to the State e-Government Agency SEGA in Bulgaria. Thank you that you are here today. I think also the first time here in our round. Then Aura Salla, a Finnish name, I think, head of the Brussels office of Facebook. Thank you today that you have time. And Svend Leirvaag, I hope Leirvaag Swedish, I think, Vice President Industry Affairs Amadeus IT Group. I think a sector who is really hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you that you have time and we can discuss this today. And I give the floor free to Erik Bergkvist. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to SME Connect for arranging these webinars, which I think are really important to really have actual relevant topics. And thank you for the viewers and the other members who will attend this webinar. It's an honor, I would say, to host this. Firstly, as mentioned, I have experience in working this on a regional level. Sometimes I may wish I didn't have that, because you see all the challenges really that the small and medium-sized companies do have these times. In general, it's not true for everyone, but in general, they have a much more difficult situation than larger companies, because the buffers are much smaller and the resilience is usually then also much smaller. And sometimes it can be, if you have 5-10 employees, sometimes perhaps just 1 or 2, and the market totally disappears, then it's not about cutting down, it's perhaps laying off totally and trying to figure out, should I restart this when things change, or should I somehow try to winter this over? So this is of course a special challenge for them. And nevertheless, you can say this in a general way, each company is different, and we need more tailor-made, I would say, strategies to help each companies, but there are many, so in the same way we had to do it in a more industrial way. So I think flexibility is actually one of the words that we have to keep very high and keep in mind, because that will be necessary. Nevertheless, though we are facing, I would say, the largest recession since the 30s, no recession is looking like the other one, but we know that the challenges for our SMEs are pretty much the same as they would have in a normal situation, whatever that could be. But right now it's more acute and it's more critical. They, of course, are thinking how to keep markets when they are sometimes totally disappeared, how to get capital, now perhaps not for expansion, but just to survive, and also how to keep competence. And if you have to get rid of competence, how can you get that competence quickly back when markets turn somewhat more normal? And that's pretty much what they're thinking about most of the time as well today. But these times it is, of course, crucial. And these small companies, they don't have the possibility sometimes to do the networks, to build the networks, to have the overview what's happening in emerging markets, what's happening well with supply chains. How can they find new supply chains when the ones they're having too often now are broken, and things like that. And that, of course, where I think this webinar is interesting with this theme, how to connect platforms with SMEs, because platforms have pretty much all the things that these SMEs would need, and they also have the possibility to connect these to governments, because platforms quite often we can see they are not going down now. They are actually doing pretty well, and doing sometimes better than ever in this market situation with Corona, where people are buying more and more and living more and more on the web. They have information, they can spread information, they have knowledge, and they can also spread knowledge. Sometimes they spread the opposite, but I see possibility, because one really important thing here would be what is happening with the small companies. How can they get connected? How can they get connected to relevant information? How can they get connected to the competence they might need, or the competence they are trying to keep? And how can they, to invest in the future, actually try to gather more competence, courses for employees, and all that other kind of things, which is beginning to be explored, but I would say pretty much unexplored in this world. How can we use platforms in that way to both increase our skills, but also as a distributor for capital, and I would say a mediator between governments and companies, because governments have access to all this. They have labor employment, they have funding, but they perhaps not always have the networks, and they perhaps not always have the I would say the skill to actually find the companies, and also to evaluate which companies are and should be eligible to this kind of fundings. So I would say you should never waste a crisis. And in all this misery, I would say, that the pandemic has created, there are also possibility to find new networks, to find new ways, to find new business models by connecting all these things. And one thing that is not explicit today, but it will cause the banks, which have an important role in all this, and could very well be much more connected to, would say, platforms, and also to SMEs, because it's a lot about knowledge. So I would say not an expert on this crisis, and I think no one is, but I'm very keen to hear what our speakers will say just in a couple of moments. And I'm also very keen, when this all is over, what have we all learned, and what have we learned for the next time we have a pandemic or this kind of, I would say, global disaster. And one thing we have learned about history, that it tends to repeat itself, almost, meaning that next time something similar we might think happen, we can't use the same recipe. But if we've learned something, we can use the processes we are now using to find successful means to actually meet new situations and meet new challenges. So I think that is something that we have to bear in mind. And as been said, and I would like to repeat that, everything happens locally, meaning that we need high resolution networks. We need the resolution that the platforms can give us, and the SMEs definitely need that. So in all this, there are great possibilities, but as a final word, we're not out of the pandemic yet. We are perhaps not even in the middle of the pandemic yet. So we need to discuss this. We need to get to work right now, but we also have to forget that, well, we still have a long way to go. With that, thank you once again for this webinar, and thank you and welcome to this.
Thank you, Mr. Bergkvist. I think you gave us really a good, very good opening and overview of all topics we want to discuss today. I think what you mentioned, tailor-made, I think this is very important. SMEs are very diverse. Second, I think what is often underestimated, how to reach out to SMEs. And perhaps this can be also a solution for Brussels, because I think the connection between the member states and their own SMEs is difficult. But at the same time, how Brussels can communicate with SMEs, I think it's much more difficult. And the last thing, I think, how fast we can react. And we have often not the feeling that the information what was coming so fast to the SMEs. I think this is a problem. And I think, are we be coming now directly to our next speaker, Florian Hartleb? Do you think if we are learning something out of this pandemic, we are too late? You are an expert for e-government. How fast we reacted now, how fast we could react it, were we well prepared, or do the pandemic shows us that we have to learn a lot and we need partners like from the private partner side? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Horst, for your nice introduction. Thank you, Mr. Bergkvist, for your introduction concerning the content, and also thank you, Ms. Fitzgerald, for wrapping up everything, and also to the others. So, of course, I'm also interested what Ms. Salla from Facebook will tell us about the topic. So, so I don't want to spend too much time, but at the beginning. But when I was reading the title first, Horst, how can governments and platforms work together? Then I was thinking actually that generally in times of this crisis, are they working together due to the fact that the EU has a new crisis as a consequence out of that we have national health systems, we have national experts, and we have no freedom of data within the EU. So when I was, for example, back home in August in Bavaria, then I had to go from Estonia, where I'm living, where everything is digitalized since 20 years. I had to go to coffees and restaurants, and I had to fill in my data on the paper without moving. So if I could have written, I also could have written, I'm Horst Heitz. So there was no identity check and nothing. So generally, we have to work on that to harmonize and to push the digital transformation forward. And now we are living what I could observe as long-time researcher on populism. I made my PhD 2004, and I also worked for the Brussels think tank Martin Center, that now we are in times of renationalization, closing the borders and only trusting our own experts and politicians. So this is indeed a challenging time which we have to overcome. What helps? Maybe some experiences from Estonia, where I'm living. And Mr. Bergkvist already said how this e-Estonia became a worldwide label is, from my outside observation, that the banks were actually pushing forward all this X-Road and all this construction in the end of the 90s. So we definitely need the close cooperation with the platforms. We also need Facebook and the social media platform to fight against disinformation and all these conspiracy theories, which are maybe as high than ever before, that Bill Gates and Soros basically have caused this virus. And we also see the demonstrations from Rome to Berlin, and then people are gathering. And we see also a decline of the information framing from the traditional groups such as the media and the established political parties. So we have a new actors, influencers, YouTubers, who are basically also spreading around a lot of disinformation, but we can observe everywhere. In Germany, we have a cooker, we have a former football star, we have different influencers who are basically forming this political discourse. So basically what we need right now as a close cooperation between governments and platforms is the support of independent, fast fact-checking organizations. I think this definitely we need, and we have to talk about a serious debate on how to digitalize the public services. So here, I think a key element is building the trust. So in Germany, for example, the people are trusting the social media platforms, but they're not trusting the state. So they are very critical because of the fear of data protection and data security. So we have to overcome that. And we also have invest in education via private platforms. So Estonia was #1 in the last PISA test. Why? Because they basically have 2 private platforms, Ecol and Studium, from private organizations, which are basically doing the communication between teachers, parents, and the students and the youngsters. And this works out, and this is necessary because we have to teach digital competencies. Now, in the last recent poll, for example, the German teachers have the last place in that, and the regular school didn't work out at all. The teachers even, we started in Germany the debate about having emails from the kids. So we generally have to rethink now the education, the online education, the digital competencies, because we don't know how long all this virus lasts. Mr. Bergkvist said that we are maybe even on the beginning. One leading German virologist said, Mr. Drosten, that in Germany the people have to wear the mask until the end of next year. So the economic crisis will come. So we definitely need an economic push for this crisis and to overcome this analog world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Florian. I think you say there's something very important. The education, how to use platforms, how to know what information has a very rich information is from a source who is not very reliable. Do you think this is one of the main problems we're facing now, because we didn't create this competence? Also for SMEs, I think 50% of SMEs don't think themselves they have competence, and 99.5% are small micro businesses, so they are normal people. Do you think this is part of the problem, that we were too late now, and we have this pandemic is a waking up call for us?
We need thank you. We need a serious debate about competencies. And we need to debate it in all the generations, from the kindergarten to the pensioners. And we need a new contract for our societies. Otherwise, I think we cannot overcome this crisis. Plus, we need exchange, not just between the governments, but also between governments and platforms. Otherwise, it's not possible to go further. We will have a new working life, we will have a new school system after this crisis. And that's why we basically have to start right now.
And you think we should then how to cooperate perhaps this education with platforms, or should it only be the normal education system like we know it, or we should work together with platforms here?
We have to work together with the platforms. We cannot leave it just to the governments. And we also have to work further. I had currently some debates with the leading online platforms on the EU level, and we have to deal with it because I think our school system has to go totally new ways. Plus, there will be a new demand for IT specialists. Even in Estonia, experts, economists, politicians are saying that we have a lack of IT specialists. So it's not just the daily business of the schools, which has to be digitalized, but also concerning the competencies, which also then is a necessity for the teachers plus the parents, in order also to build up trust and to change the mindset.
Thank you very much. Now we're coming to our next speaker, Krasimir Simonski from the e-government agency in Bulgaria. I think the first idea is, why the governments are so late with own platforms, or why we have to cooperate with private platforms. Is this only now a thing what will change, or is this really something what will be in the future a basic cooperation, a fundamental cooperation, or it will be only until the government's learning to use platforms by themselves? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First, thank you for the invitation and for the choice of this topic. It's I won't say it's new for me, but first time I am discussing this in such format, high format. And to answer to you, actually, there is short answer, yes, all of that. So let me be more specific about that. And I mean, in the introduction, it was already mentioned that we are really in a crisis we've never seen in our life. I mean, it's compared with the depression of last century, 1929, and all industries are hit, the life, etc. Something we've never seen. That no doubt about that. But I would like to put things in more positive perspective. And actually, if we look at the digital technologies and look in the perspective of digital transformation, actually pandemic had this positive impact on switching quickly and forced actually to go digital. And I'll give you the example with Bulgaria. Just in a week after March, it was March 23rd in Bulgaria. In a week, all schools in Bulgaria went online. All they adopted distance learning technologies that they had in possession. All content they had was digital at that time, and just in a week, enforced by the pandemic. Something that we've been trying for tens of years, starting 95, 96. And now it happened in a week. Of course, it happened difficult way because had to happen fast, had to happen without the necessary adjustments of the technology, of the infrastructure, etc. But it happened and it worked. And that brought teachers, students, parents, the Ministry of Education, all mobilized. That's one example. And actually, there was a lot of room for the small and medium enterprises that were in the digital sphere to help schools actually to adapt and to help even families to work with this technology. The other example is the government. We went online almost in less than a week, working from home, distance learning. And all that was, you know, this impetus for digitalization. And you know that right now, digital transformation is in the focus of the European Union and all our countries. And in this sense, actually, I see, it's not good to say, but positive impact toward that direction. In the perspective that we are talking about small and medium enterprises, there is a lot of room for edge businesses, so to say. And talking about the platforms, around platforms, there is a lot of business, given that platforms are open and allow small and medium enterprises to develop their business, either integrating their services and the products into a specific solution, or directly to provide services to them, thus providing this communication environment that's needed for the business to work, actually, to communicate. And look at the digital e-commerce, the e-commerce overall. It was booming. The share of sales, online sales, was growing rapidly. So that really was the tipping point for the digital transformation, and it's the wave that we should utilize. And actually, rather than going of survival, going of adapting to the new conditions, because that's going to continue. It's not something that will stop like that just overnight. It's going to be at least a year. Plus, I mean, already reaching this moment of changes, there is no way back. I mean, I've been in information technologies for 30 years, and whatever you accomplish with digital technologies, there is no way back, including budget. Once you gain a level of budget, it at least stays like that. So this transformation in a week happened thanks to some of the platforms. We're talking about Zoom that we're using now. We're talking about Microsoft Teams, WebEx, just taking this type of platforms. And actually, when we talk about platforms and governments, we have to be specific. At least I'll be specific in that sort of disclaimer. When I go about government, I talk about digital governments. And understand me this when I say government. And especially in its best format, as it's called, good digital governance, which very much, at least at technology level, is same as the platforms level as technology. It's another example I can give with the city halls. Local SMEs develop solutions for the city halls to work online in Bulgaria as well. Of course, the government had to, actually the National Assembly had to adopt changes in the legislation to legitimate this way of work, meaning that city halls can take decisions now online, even without digital signature, but anyway. And saying all this about the platforms and governments and looking in collaborative perspective, I think it's important to understand the similarities and differences between the platforms and the governments. And there are many similarities between digital government and the platforms. At least both serve citizens, both use technologies. And just look at the government portals. They are platforms, actually. It's a platform technology. I mean, the services that we provide through our government portal, we would like it behaves as a platform. We're still not there as technology. I mean, we have a lot to learn from the platforms. This is where they can help us to serve the citizens and the small and medium enterprises. But we want those portals to be as intuitive, for instance, as the platforms, the good platforms are. And well, the government is different than the platforms in several ways, at least technology maturity. It takes more time for governments to deploy specific technologies and so on and so on. But if we take the size of the platforms, they're the size, the big platforms, just Facebook. Facebook has the size of our country if we talk about the revenue in comparison with the GDP. Number of employees that work for the government and number of the employees that work for the big platforms. So many similarities we can see here. But there are differences as well. And we should respect those differences and actually see the way how we can turn them into advantages, meaning learning from each other. That's different and it's good. So we serve citizens, governments are not for profit, platforms serve customers, platforms are native with technology, the governments are more service oriented, but if the platforms have the communication power, the governments have the action power. And this is where this collaboration actually can bring the good result, I would say. So might be talking about oranges and apples, but we can have the best cocktail of that, the juice. So one issue when working with the platforms, and actually powerful platforms, and its issue even at EU level, is digital sovereignty of governments. Because when you work with such big partner, let's take Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, digital sovereignty is an issue. Even in the light of GDPR, for instance, where you store the data, where you store the personal data. Let's take the cloud platforms. The public cloud platforms, they provide the best technology solutions based on using their public platforms for many reasons. even including cybersecurity. The best cybersecurity can be provided when you centralize the data, so you protect them into a closed domain. And that sovereignty, I think, is something that should be kept in mind, and actually both sides should respect that and keep, you know, that intact for the government. So in sort of conclusions, I would say the government should behave more like platforms when we talk about technologies and their digital emanation, actually. And we really would like our portals to be as good and as intuitive as the platforms. Platforms, I see room for them to help governments serve their constituencies, at the same time paying this due respect to the digital sovereignty. And pandemic indeed added a lot of energy into this process of digitalization, so we should seize the moment. I would stop here and we'll continue probably.
I think it was very interesting, and it was nearly what also United Nations was writing about, the collaboration of governments and platforms. They have short-term strategies and mid-term and long-term strategies, and it fits what you said. In fact, you should learn from platform, you should work with them together, but you need own capacities in the end. You need own sovereignty, and then also own resources for this. And I think to mix apples and oranges is a good thing, to see where's the strength, where are the limits. The only thing is what I would like to ask, how fast you think, you say it's very, it was impressive as Bulgaria was adopting so fast. It's faster than Bavaria did. So my home country, we need longer to adapt the digital situation. But do you think really you need the transformation and that SMEs and really the e-government platforms coming really? How much time you think we need for this? Is this now something what is coming fast, or what is your perspective for the future? Is this something what is slowing down after the pandemic, or has this dynamic where you say in 5 years we are digitalized in the e-government, or is this something it takes only 10 years, then 20 years?
Thank you for this question. I'll refer to what Florian mentioned about the skills. And when we talk about this process, it's about people. And we're talking about people, competent, skilled people who understand, who have the skills for these digital services, and the competence actually to take decision in an online environment, if you want, especially for the businesses. So I think the skills and competencies are key to take the best benefit of all this. Technologies are there, and as we see from the platforms, they're adapting very fast, very quick. They actually the first messages came from the platforms. And I'm again referring to WebEx and Zoom, etc., who offer their services free for the time of the pandemic. And that's a good example of how they could get involved and have their social responsibility.
The last question, if you say, speaking about education platforms, it is not also to discuss infrastructure. The majority of SMEs on the countryside active. Do they have really the possibilities to use an efficient way the digitalization because they have not a fast internet and so on? Is this a problem in Europe? Is this a problem in Bulgaria?
Yes and no, because Bulgaria actually is 70% of the population live in big cities. That said, the infrastructure, internet infrastructure in big cities is really good. One of the best, I would say. Very cheap access to internet, at the same time really good speed. When we talk about the cities, it's different situation in rural areas. This is where we still lack infrastructure because of the lack of the business moment there and investment return. But situation is improving, and I won't say it's the issue of access to internet and to the services, but availability of the services. And in this account, I include our government. we are still in debt to the citizens with the services to provide to them, digital services. I mean.
Thank you very much. Then we coming now to the private sector. Our Salla, Facebook. I think this is one of the best well-known platform in the world. You are in fact a mediator. You have the contact to the SMEs, but you have also to their clients, to the customers. But you worked also now during the pandemic with European institutions and also with governments. What are your experience now from these times? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for this opportunity to speak here today. First of all, let me say that as a Finn, it's a music to my ears hearing us talking about education, and also I would add here digital literacy, media literacy, and so on and so forth. And that's something that my team also here in Brussels is working on daily basis. And just addressing here that even though I'm a director for the EU affairs, for me, EU is not in Brussels, EU is in member states. So that's why our company is also doing our efforts in all 27 member states. And I would say that the COVID-19 crisis has really reminded us all how important it is to have access to reliable, detailed, and really timely information from our governments, both for citizens and businesses. And since the virus was declared a public health emergency in January, we've taken, as a company, proactive measures to make sure everyone has access to credible and accurate information, to stop misinformation and harmful content, to encourage civil engagement and support global health experts, local governments, and businesses and communities. We work with independent third-party fact-checkers. As you may know, we promote news literacy programs globally, as well as digital literacy and media literacy programs also here in the EU. And to inform people in this context about the posts they see in news feeds, it's very important for us to emphasize that in our news feeds, we will have accurate information. And to effectively respond to the pandemic, we have expanded our fact-checking network in Europe, and we have given out grants to fact-checking organizations. Since March 2020, we have put warning labels on about 40 million pieces of false content related to COVID-19 on Facebook, and based on around 4,000 articles flagged by our independent fact-checking partners. More than 30 million people in the EU visited the COVID-19 Information Center during the month of July only, and more than 40 million people during the month of August. And during this pandemic, Facebook has partnered, as you said rightly, with governments and the World Healthcare Organization to get accurate information directly to citizens on a massive scale. In parallel, we have also promoted trusted information. Through our COVID-19 Information Center and pop-ups on Facebook and Instagram that you might have seen, we pointed in only first months over 2 billion people to information coming directly from the World Healthcare Organization and other health authorities. And over 350 million people use this pathway since the beginning of the crisis until May to access credible information sources. We have also worked with several EU national governments and with the European Parliament to facilitate their use of our platforms to get accurate and timely information to citizens. For example, the European Parliament, the French government's Central Information Service, Lithuanian government, Slovakian Ministry of Health, and many others has transmitted information to their staff and citizens via our technologies like Messenger. On WhatsApp, the Croatian Ministry of Health, the Office of the Prime Minister of Poland, the government of Andalusia in Spain, the city of Milan, just mentioned a couple of governments here and organizations. And also in Netherlands, their Foreign Affairs Ministry, they all have used WhatsApp to create a channel of information where citizens could subscribe for routine updates. To increase the reach and trusted sources, we have offered the World Healthcare Organization unlimited advertising coupons, and we are onboarding local health authorities in Europe to make sure people see pop-ups about national information sites. If you go to your Facebook, you can see that there is information in your own language from your own healthcare authorities, because we understand how important it is for people to get information in their own language. And we can also see that several EU government authorities have used these services to spread the information to their own staff. And also, we understand that this is an economic crisis. And European businesses need information about financing and support governments and the EU now have made available. With new sources of economic relief and grants being set up, European businesses need to know concretely where to go and how to access this funding. That's why we have our own dedicated channels for reaching small businesses and our governments to connect small businesses and governments to support these businesses to survive and businesses to find this information. So we are joining other organizations, trade associations, digital platforms in their efforts, and we have built this in-app economic government relief tool to point small businesses towards relevant information sources on recovery, helping their recovery. Economic relief is a new dedicated space in the Facebook app where business owners can easily click on links to this funding and also find information about loans, tax relief programs available in their country. And in the EU, we have launched this app in most of the countries already in July. And we really recognize that SMEs are at the heart of the path to recovery in Europe. And as a complement to government's fund, we launched this Facebook small business grants, and we made approximately 90 million euros available for hard-hit SMEs. We know that this is not a huge amount of money, but we also know how important it is to give some relief to these companies. Last but not least, I want to address that we support evidence-based policymaking, and as a part of our Data for Good initiative, we share anonymized, aggregated data with leading researchers on the COVID-19 mobility data network for a better understanding of how the virus spread across mobile populations. We have also put together disease prevention maps that help public health organizations improve the effectiveness of health campaigns and epidemic response. We have also teamed up with the OECD and the World Bank to use data insights and report on how small businesses in the EU are coping with the economic downturn. Our first report, released in July, revealed that while many companies could not do their face-to-face business during the pandemic, at least 1/3 of SMEs in all the EU countries covered earned a minimum of 25% of their sales from digital channels. We believe that smart use of data and digital tools can speed up the reopening of economy in the EU, at least the last affected areas. Innovative and responsible utilization of data can also help Europe digitalize crisis response and mitigation, as well as resilience building. Boosting digital capacity would allow Europe to fight future crises and the economic turmoil that comes with them more effectively. And I just want to end up saying that we, as a company from Facebook, we want to be part of this digital solution.
Thank you very much. The numbers were impressive in what you are doing, not only as platform, also as company. I think this grants is separated from this your corporate social responsibility, in fact, for SMEs. But I think the very important message is, I think, how you have the direct connection to SMEs, because this is always a problem, I think, to reach them also very fast. Which region in the world, in Europe, are really cooperating with you? Is this more the South, the East Europe? Is there a trend? Is this, or this really, or all member states are using this, the possibility to, with you, to use you as a channel, in fact?
That's a great question. Yeah, actually, yes, in every country, SMEs are using our tools. We are cooperating, or we have 25 million companies overall in the EU using our platforms. And that is remarkable. And we also feel very responsible for serving them also throughout this crisis. I had the privilege in my previous work in the European Commission to actually go to every EU country and visit startup hubs and these kind of SME incubators in all member states. And you can really see that particularly in Eastern countries and Central countries, they have this hunger to actually create, be innovative and use more digital tools. And that's great. So that's why also as a company, we want to be not only in France and Germany, they are super important countries, but also in Latvia, in Bulgaria or Romania or elsewhere, and help companies to recover and be innovative in their solutions.
I was a little bit making research. You have also a program for local communities to be connected, to help each other on Facebook. I find this was a very good idea. If you make the link back to Mr. Bergkvist, that the majority of SMEs are local. How this works, this local idea from Facebook? Because in one way, you are really global and really something, but you have more the impression you can reach very fast many SMEs. But can you there reach really also how deep you can go in these communities, how local, regional you can be sent these messages?
What is great with our platforms is that actually you have an access on your hand when you have your mobile phone there, like you have a global reach. So no matter where you come from, small town from Finland or from Malta, all of a sudden, if you have your business, you have this ability to reach out to a global markets. And the other thing that is great on our platforms is that you can use it on your own language, because we are not providing the content on our platforms. Our users are providing the content on our platforms. So in that sense, there are no language barriers. Of course, if you want to make a global business, English is a easier language to use. However, you can also do your business locally. Are you in Africa? Are you in Malta? Or are you in Slovakia? Because our platforms enables this in all regions.
So then you, in fact, also a cross-border tool, because I think this is the limits also from the government of Bulgaria. What is the impact then for the internal market? What is, how they are connected? And I think this is also very interesting to get this industry data, but this links us also to the next speaker, Svend Leirvaag from Amadeus. I think your tourism sector, where your company is working, very strong hit by the pandemic. And I know that hotels and restaurants were using Facebook to reach out to the guests and so on, be that they are reopen or that they have new offers and so on. They use this tool very strong on Facebook. In the same time, so to the clients, you as Amadeus, you are not directly not a tool like Facebook. You are directly connected with the travel agencies, with the hotels, and so on. What are your experience now as platform during this pandemic? Please, the floor is yours.
So you're absolutely right. We are only business to business. We are, call it the ERP system, the Enterprise Resource Planning System for travel sellers globally. And through our business to business platform, we connect travel providers with these travel sellers. So that allows a small travel business in the north of Sweden to in fact be visible and connected through our network to a travel seller anywhere in the world. And our platform enables that travel seller and the provider to transact a purchase on behalf of a client. So book a hotel room or book a flight ticket and other products and services. So we are a business-to-business platform. We cannot, of course, compete with the numbers of Facebook, but we are a global leader in our field. We don't do advertising. We are purely transactional. So we don't preference content. We rank neutrally, which means that the consumer has neutral choice, or the client has neutral choice. The travel agent can choose between different options, and that's the function of the services that we provide. On the technology side, as you will know, Europe is quite strong in terms of business-to-business technology. And we're one of the few companies that have grown in Europe to become a global technology leader. And if you look behind the scenes of what we provide, you will be impressed. We have some very impressive credentials in the technology area. On the transaction side, we process more transactions per second than Google. And not very many people actually understand the level of technology that we apply to provide the services we do. We can come back to this challenge that was mentioned previously about technical or technological sovereignty in Europe. We wish there were more of us. So European companies, we believe that it would be good for Europe to foster some other champions like us, because we power a lot of startups and SME companies also in the technology field. In addition to having, and for this conversation, most of our customers are SMEs. Most of our customers are small businesses. They're small travel agents, they are small airlines, they are small hotels or others. And the long tail, to call it that, in the travel and tourism industry is, as mentioned before, also severely hit by this crisis. I think one of the factors that is not widely understood yet, and we can talk about everything we're doing to help companies and airlines and others in this crisis, and with reaccommodation and cancellations and all of these things that hit us. But I think it's time that we start to talk about the recovery, because this pandemic will end. It may take longer than we hope, but it will end. And I don't think that we should fall for the temptation to think that just because we just had a pandemic, the likelihood of another one is increasing. I think that there will be a long time before we have a similar situation. And we have an opportunity to now try to foster a robust and accelerate the economic recovery. And the SME perspective needs to be very, very central to any government's consideration of what needs to happen. And I think one point, as I said, that is not widely understood is that the impact on the economy that we now see is the value of mobility. Because the only thing, and despite all of these fantastic digital tools, none of which is European, by the way, despite that, and despite the collaboration that we have, we cannot recover sitting on our ass. We have to start moving. And the economic impact of the pandemic that we see is, in fact, the impact of restrictions on mobility. So I think that the perspective needs to be that. How can we ensure that we use, of course, technology to facilitate the recovery of mobility? How can we ensure that governments are not falling for populist temptations like they do now and just fend for their own interest, but actually start looking to restore connectivity. How can we ensure that we have data, transport data, that is available to SMEs in different regions in Europe to find good and more sustainable travel options than before? And how can we then use public funding to foster that multiplier effect? So to me, it is not about restoring things to a new normal. No, it is much simpler than that. We have to start moving, because if people don't start moving, we cannot sit and continue communicating to each other digitally. It just doesn't work. You can improve the things and improve the efficiency, but people have to move. And I think that needs to be the perspective of the political discussion. I think personally that the focus is too much on how to provide relief packages, and the European Union is going to give X hundred million to these different purposes. But the thought on how it gets people moving is not sufficiently developed. And the lack of collaboration between member states, for instance, in the European Union, is appalling. And the degree of selfishness that is displayed around in many different areas is absolutely terrible. Because this is the time where we need to reconnect and find new ways of working together, because we cannot use yesterday's approaches to solve tomorrow's problems. So what are those models where we can channel energy and funding and technology to get people moving? Because we know now that that is what is needed to get us out of this crisis from an economic point of view. So I'll leave it there, and hopefully we can have some interesting conversations on those topics.
Thank you very much. I think you make a very strong point, because if we're talking always about platform e-government, we should not forget the real world outside. And in fact, that platforms like you, Amadeus, can help that this is going on again, that we coming, and it shows also, because Mr. Bergkvist says in the beginning, the platforms are the big winners. In fact, not all. In fact, all platforms are basically a reality in the end. And if you say SMEs are your main partners, means if SMEs are dying, you are dying too.
Of course.
In the long term. But if you say what you could do for as platform, I know from your work, because you were active, how to restart the movement with digitalization, with technical solutions and so on. How you were communicating with SMEs, how you brought them on board, how you informed them about what's going on in Brazil. I think security is a very important point in tourism, in the tourism sector. The people are right to move again. How you supported this?
So I think the word that we use is to restore traveler confidence. And you have so broadly speaking, you have two types of travel. One is the unorganized, the individual, I book my own hotel and I go there, I take my car, whatever it is. And then you have the organized or the managed side of travel. And both of them are, of course, relying on information to make so that one is confident and secure or feels secure to make that trip. It spans from public transport today. Is it safe to go on the bus in my city? Do I need to wear a mask? Is everybody else wearing a mask? To, is it safe to go to this country? And today the fragmentation of information is such that it is impossible for anyone to navigate clearly, because the protocols are different in every single state, even, or not to mention any, different member states. So you have no clarity and therefore very little surety of what it is that you can expect and what is safe and what is not. So of course technology can help, but garbage in, garbage out. So if you have a garbled message and it is impossible to navigate from it, you can have a lot of good technology, but it's not going to really help you. So we need different layers of effort and different ways of collaborating to provide that clarity that technology then can facilitate. So some degree of standardization, you need standardization. Unless you are a monopoly player that controls the world, Some would argue that there is a big player called Google that is in process of doing that. But then you need standards of interoperability. And where are the standards of interoperability in this phase for not only SMEs, but in the travel and transport sector in this recovery phase? We need to work out what they are. And that's a big challenge in this political landscape. And unfortunately, I don't see very much improvement in that area.
But if you say it sounds very complicated and a big mess, in fact, in this sector, if you see this, then you are one. I know there are also other associations, but then that's a big company, also as a platform, you're a mediator for SMEs to bring these concerns on the table. Or you would
Absolutely.
say, okay, then this is clear, then this is very functional, because I think SMEs has really a problem if you have a hotel or something, a little travel agency, you're fighting to survive. At the moment, you have no time to go to Brussels and to bring this on the table.
And real-time information. So what I have is, we have real-time information that says, yes, the room is available, or the hotel is closed, or the flight is operating, or it is not operating, and this destination is open and this is not. So to that extent, yes, we make we systemize that information and make it consumable in a very, very efficient way and transactable to the small business that needs to service clients. But beyond that, it is difficult for us to make sense of it. We need to make sure that government makes sense of it. Governments collaborate to make sense of it, because travel and transport are always between A and B and back. So it could be between the municipality and to the next one. And we have that in Europe. They have different protocols. How can you ensure traveler confidence and get people moving unless you have that coordination of standardization to connect people?
Thank you very much. I think now we have time to discuss all this input. I think very different perspectives, because before we coming to the conclusion of Ms. Fitzgerald, now the time is also to have questions for the audience, but also for the other speakers, to the others. I have one question. If you're talking always about collaboration between governments and platforms, do platforms also cooperate between each other? Is this, or is only, I think only if I think on Facebook, I see a lot of advertising for tourism, a lot discussion about traveling and so on. Perhaps you could say something about that.
That's a great question. Actually, not a platform, but I just had a call before this with my colleague from Microsoft, and day before that with Amazon. And also, we have a really good collaboration with other tech companies, other platforms like Twitter, for example. And we just participated on a roundtable where there are plenty of companies using our platforms, but also having their own. So definitely we are doing a lot of cooperation. And if there is something that we are missing, I'm happy to have a connection and build a new cooperation also.
Thank you very much. Krasimir, you have already questions or something to add?
Yes, I would like to comment on Mr. Leirvaag challenge about the governments. And actually, at the moment, our government has as one of the top priorities reviving the tourism, which being one of the main industries for Bulgaria, I would say. I know same is for Greece, same is for Turkey, and other countries. And at this moment, I'm sure there is accumulated sleeping demand for travel. I personally would love to travel as I traveled before, no doubt about that. But reality is reality. Security is quite an issue. And I mean, governments on the other side, they have to look for security of its citizens. So that's first, because we are talking about really serious issue of the health. It's proven that it's spread this way. But on the other hand, as I spoke about adaptation to the situation, because I come also from travel industry, online travel industry, by the way, internet booking engines like Amadeus engine. And what we see now in the statistic, in the travel statistic, the volume of cargo is going really high, rising tremendously. It's a result of the e-commerce. It's a result of people sitting home using digital technology and ordering goods, and those goods have to be delivered. Plus, I mean, the landscape of travel is changing. People now prefer local distances, you know, going from, especially for Bulgaria, usually I go to Greece for my vacation, but this year I couldn't go there because of all the restrictions, etc., etc. So I'm optimistic about that, and I'm with you on the recovery issue. And I've seen this happening in other crises that happened in travel. The demand is still there. It's sleeping, but when time comes, when security proves you can travel, I'm sure it will go skyrocket. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Svend, you want to?
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, but I just wanted to add. Of course, tourism is important, but sometimes tourism is, you put an equal sign between tourism and the trips that I make on my spare time, spending my own money. And it sometimes, not always, but in many cases, that conversation sort of alienates the perspective that we believe is more relevant, and that is that business travel today is the prerequisite for leisure travel. So unless there is a viable economic development in society, unless there is an infrastructure for travel and transport and mobility, you cannot sustain tourism. So that means that we believe that you need, from a government point of view, you'd be better off merging the perspective, even as far as talking about mobility, and it is local, it is regional, it is international, it is outgoing, it is incoming, and look at infrastructure and other political initiatives from a much more holistic perspective. That gives a different dialogue, and then you start talking about connecting through different modes of transport. You start connecting local urban transport with regional transport, railways, connecting that with trips, with airlines, and making that available to visitors coming from the outside. So that would be my recommendation, that if you have a say in the conversation at government level, is to not talk about tourism as incoming tourism, people spending own money on their spare time, but pull up and have a much more helicoptering perspective on how you build infrastructure to enable mobility in the wider sense.
Absolutely agree. I hope you're not talking about leisure, but
No.
multimodal certainly needs support from the government. And I mean, here also come technology, because coming at the airport and choosing a private transport to your final destination, secure, isolated, that's something that
coming
also...
to the transport platforms and so on, who are also an issue, but who taking also part on this. I would have a question also, perhaps also to Mr. Bergkvist, also Mr. Aura. Who was the first step? Who was coming to you to work together on this platform thing? And what is the perspective in the future? To work together in the future. And then I would like to also to bring Ms. Fitzgerald on board. Perhaps she has also experience from Ireland before we coming to the other things. Aura, perhaps you can say who was the first step and where you're thinking it's going, this cooperation?
Well, I must say that we are cooperating on a daily basis with all EU institutions, and particularly during the COVID-19, it was really important for us that we work on every level. So in the services level, with technical details and finding out the best solutions, how we can spread accurate and right information throughout different channels, and then also at the political level, so that we have a good cooperation when we talk about sustainable economic recovery, how we can support SMEs in Europe, and also how we do this locally. So it's something that we do, and it's really bread and butter for us in our everyday work on our policy teams. However, now we have really teamed up more also in different levels and also in regions, which is, as I mentioned earlier, also very important for us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bergkvist, now from your experience as from the European Parliament, we heard also that the Parliament was cooperating with Facebook. What is your idea from the future of cooperation and your experience from this? Will be there a strategy in the future? We will work on this, or is there already a strategy from your point of view in the future that the European, or is it should be stay to the member states to cooperate with the platforms? What is your perspective on this?
Well, in this sense, I think we need both, and we will have a suggestion for a digital strategy later this autumn, probably, if it's not delayed, and that will take, or at least discuss, some of these matters. But I think we need both, in a way, national and regional, sometimes local cooperation with these platforms. And that's also my experience from my former seat as a regional councillor, that all this is really necessary. Some things can't be handled in too little scale. They handle, well, an EU scale and sometimes even a global scale, and that could be also rules for this. I think something that we sometimes forget, and this is essential, if we are going to take the next digital step with platforms, with government corporations, and all that, is that we need the basic infrastructure, and sometimes we forget. And I'm very glad that von der Leyen mentioned during her State of the Union that we need a broadband, a fast broadband, and of course that fiber we have to connect Europe with. And it's only partly connected, and not even the biggest cities sometimes, I would say, have sufficient. And this is essential. If we are to invest in 5G and later in 6G, we know that we need a broadband to connect all these 5G and 6G masts and things like that. And that's the base, and that has to be there. Then, of course, the next step is to do all this, and we can see where we have this working. Then we have platforms, we have a digital world. I would say my experience, and it's also something I've talked a lot, and I would say it's been part of this seminar. We can see now that we are using Zoom, we are using WebEx and all this in a way that we never could imagine. I think that's really good. Someone said that what we had thought about for 10 years, now we're done in a week. But we also see when we can use video conferences, but we also see when we can't. And I think some things are lacking, and it might be possible to develop it up in a video conference, but you need, because if we work in politics, I would say in all kind of meetings, the action isn't on the meeting, the action is on the coffee break. So the one who can invent a Zoom application or a WebEx application where you have the coffee break, where we can talk, you can have the information, informal discussions, and you also can have the negotiations. Then you have a true digital software, and then we can actually connect things much more. But as been said, I also agree, we need to travel, we need to get back to traveling, because when people interact in life, nothing can really beat that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Fitzgerald, perhaps to bring you also, before you have your conclusion in this discussion, your perspective, perhaps also an Irish perspective, what is your impression of this communication with platforms? Or what is you think, what we can learn now out of this situation? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Well, it's been fascinating listening to the different perspectives, and I think Sven gave us a good kick there, the EU and what we need to do, and I'll make some comments about that. But I suppose what strikes me overall, I mean, there's a lot of different elements to what we're talking about here today, But I suppose from my own experience as a minister over 8 years here in Ireland and working with platforms, I mean, I think what we're seeing in every area, whether you're talking about small business, you're talking about platforms, you're talking about the EU, you're talking, as some of the speakers did, about education, and in Bulgaria, you were talking about how, you know, the changes have been dealt with in schools. Krasimir was talking about that. You know, I think this is it's an unprecedented time to make changes. We're seeing changes that over the years, somebody said it already, I've heard people talking for years about, you know, whether it's working from home, cooperation with the platforms, building trust with the platforms, using the platforms. I mean, working together, small business and the platforms. I mean, what we're seeing now is an unprecedented necessity to build bridges and have those relationships, and for government to take every action it can to support that, whether that's financial, it's initiatives, it's bringing the groups together. We're really seeing absolute trust, for example, with the platforms. Traditionally, I've seen lack of trust. I've seen problems. We've seen taxation issues. You know, we've seen lots of sides to the platforms. And now we're seeing this incredible opportunity to help, to connect. I mean, it's always been there, I have felt, and there's always been huge potential. But equally at this point, I think you'll be aware that the European Parliament has just set up a new committee, just to mention it, which is a new committee on foreign interference, democratic processes and disinformation. Now that gives you an idea of some of the concerns in the Parliament and how we need to tackle those in relation to getting communication across. I mean, what we haven't talked about really here are the health issues. And it seems to me we can't have the kind of conversation we're having today without discussing, you know, the pandemic and how the actual virus is playing out in different countries. And Sven, you're right, it's been very slow in the EU to begin with, but I'd be much more hopeful now, having seen what's happened. We were very slow to begin with in terms of supporting Italy, extraordinarily slow. But now what we're seeing, and particularly from the Commission President, is an absolute recognition that we have to work together if our economies are to grow. But if we can't deal with the pandemic, our economies won't grow. And I mean, it's utterly interconnected. I mean, you can't really talk economically without talking in relation to the pandemic at the moment. So one depends on, you know, they're incredibly interconnected. And there's no point talking about, you know, we want to see more mobility. You can't have more mobility unless we have absolutely clear communication and information on the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of, what I've seen over the years in Ireland is really action now across Europe, not just Ireland, with the platforms. And, you know, there's going to be demands on both sides, but absolutely essential now that we have that kind of connectivity. And I think it's the most challenging period we've ever faced in Europe. It's the most challenging health issue and the most challenging for small business. You know, and how can we help small businesses to have the digital sophistication that they need? We've heard the statistics from you, Horst. They're actually very poor at the moment in terms of that. And if they're going to seek out, you know, new markets, you absolutely have to increase all that literacy and use of digital and so on. So, I mean, I think we've seen some very positive things. Just to make a few points, I mean, the interchanges we've seen in relation to apps across Europe in relation to health, and the supports that have been given both from the Parliament and from the digital companies to one another, and the contact tracing apps, and that's developing all of the time. Just as we were speaking, I got a note in, a news alert from the Irish Times telling me about how Germany, Italy, Ireland, a number of countries were now deepening the connections in our own apps. And that's what we need to see across Europe. And the member states are also testing the infrastructure in the Commission with the platforms. So I think tackling the misinformation, working closer together on the contact tracing apps, as well as all the other areas that the colleagues here have spoken about, is going to make all the difference. And I think every citizen is seeing the difference that digital sophistication makes now. But how do we get out to vulnerable groups? How do we reach out further than those who are already expert? And that's one of the big challenges, I think, of this period. But it is the age of disruption, and we're being very disrupted in a lot of areas. And it's going to take really smart connections from the platforms to governments to citizens, if we are to make the most of this opportunity. But the title of your session today is how can we tame the societal and economic effects of the virus and be more resilient? And I think all of the points that have come up today about governments being more digitalized, about public services reaching out, about education. I mean, there's tasks for all of us. And I think the EU has to lead. The Commission is leading on greater digital, connectivity, has a strategy, is very conscious of it during coronavirus. And I'd be confident, actually, that it will spread to other areas as well. The model that we're seeing being developed now to deal with coronavirus does involve incredible connectivity and communication. So I think there's a model there, that we're going to use for business. We're going to use it as we go forward in a very productive way, potentially.
Thank you very much. I think you mentioned very good points. We didn't discuss really the point of health, because if we don't fight the pandemic, there will be also not a fast recovery. And platforms can be really a good tool for this. And we had also a lot of discussion about these apps. I'm using also one in Germany. I'm not 100%, I try. I think everybody has to learn also now from out of these apps. It's the first time we're using this. And the other thing is, of course, what is related with trust. Trust, we had a lot of discussion about platforms where there was also a lack of trust. Now we are trying to retrust. We see more the benefits also out of platforms now. I think it's changing also the discussion. I want only to make the link to Florian Hartleb if we're discussing about trust, data, and also about how we are tackling this as a tool to deal with the health issues, to embrace this on European level and on national level. What you would be commenting here?
Thank you, Horst. One point we haven't discussed yet is the question of values and also the new global world order after the pandemic. We are talking about the new US elections. We are talking about the fear that of manipulation. We are talking about the new role of China, the role of Huawei. And so basically, coming back to the title of this conference of today is how can governments and platforms work together? Does it mean all the governments, so also the authoritarian ones, or are we just talking about the liberal democratic governments? I think this would be a very important point. What I would like to hear from Ms. Fitzgerald for their closing remarks. Thank you very much.
I'm thinking, yes. I think this is good that you here mention also this point. If we're discussing platforms, if we're discussing business, we have to discuss values. It's very strong related also with SMEs and democracy. And we have to discuss then how we handle such crises like this health crisis, who has a chance for dictatorships and others to increase power and influence and misinformation. I think we're coming now to the end of this event. I think it was not the closing remarks, but I think Ms. Fitzgerald will perhaps add something to the end now. Perhaps I give now everybody a chance to say what he takes out of this webinar and what he wishes for the future. And we're starting then directly with Mr. Erik Bergkvist, and that he has a chance, what is his key messages out from here and what he wants to learn, and then that we have the conclusion by Ms. Fitzgerald. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's been very interesting to listen to all this, and I would say I've learned a lot. What I will take from this meeting is that we are in a pandemic. It's not over. but that a lot of things are happening that are positive in all this misery. A lot of positive things are happening, and it's speeding up the digitalization, and it will give us a tremendous leverage once we're out of this and actually can start anew, because the world has changed, and I think that's been a very clear message through this seminar. So that will be something that we've learned a lot. We've speeded up processes, and once we're out of this, things will look much brighter. Thank you.
Ms. Krasimir, what you learned out of this here now, this discussion?
Yeah, I learned a lot. Thank you for this chance. I'll use the sentence, when you're given a lemon, make a lemonade. So I've heard that in Chinese, crisis also has the meaning of opportunity. So this is unprecedented time for development and for digital transformation. That's the positive we can take out of this pandemic. Otherwise, let's think about recovery and what to do after the crisis.
Aura, please.
Yes, thank you so much. I have learned a lot, and I have to say that a few of the key findings will definitely be that with cooperation, we can achieve so much more than doing these things separately. Digitalization is here right now, so we need to make sure that we are enabling businesses in Europe to use digitalization in a safe way, and also making use of data a new way. And companies like Facebook really want to be part of the solution here in Europe, and also enabling this real European single market that we have been working, many of us, for years and decades even, to be a realism sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much. Svend, please.
Thanks. I think these types of conversations are always enlightening, and I always take something back that I possibly hadn't thought of before. I think that we can, so the takeaway for me is that there is certainly great potential in collaboration between governments and platforms, between platforms, but that needs to end. That needs to be based on new collaboration models. So, like I said, I don't see that the traditional ways of doing things are sufficient in solving the challenges we have before us, because, as everybody said, the situation is unprecedented. The second thing is that I believe it is up to the government, and I think we're talking about the democratic governments of the European Economic Area at the very least, and primarily, have to take some very conscious choices about what sort of collaboration models with what platforms to ensure that we are consistent with the concept of the European values, and which in fact does not throw out European sovereignty, whether digital or technology-wise, with the bathwater. So conscious decisions with new collaboration models, but yes, the potential is substantial.
Thank you, Florian. Your last words?
Yeah, Aura told us what we can take out from the efforts from the Facebook. This is fine, but I also hope that we all can take something out from the help of the respective governments plus the European Union. And I think in this, we are just at the beginning, because we have to achieve some kind of so-called output legitimation. Otherwise, we are losing the trust.
But then, for my point, I give my last thing before I give to the last to Mr. Gerald. I learned here now that we have to speak about global and local solutions acting. It must be fast. And I think what I learned, that we have to connect these things, business, health, and values. And now, Mr. Gerald, this is now you.
Well, I wouldn't dare try and summarize in 3 minutes what we've heard today and the complexity of it, but I'll make a couple of points. First of all, I think we're in the middle of effectively a war between liberal and illiberal forces. And we need to be very clear about which side we're on. We need to be very clear in the European Parliament about the rule of law, democracy, sanctions, who we're doing business with, how we're doing it. We've a very tricky geopolitical situation with America and China and Europe. I think our trade policies are going to have to be looked at very carefully in terms of values. I will make that point. I think that there's tremendous potential and new relationships between the platforms and business, between business and government, in a way that perhaps we've never had before, because this is the absolute crisis of funding for the businesses and small businesses in particular, but for everyone. It's an absolute crisis in terms of health. So how do you make the best use of a crisis? I think a lot of the points that have come up here today point to some of the solutions. Legislation isn't going to be enough, because legislation is going to be too slow, actually, for a lot of what we're talking about. So it's about the best practice models we can possibly develop between the platforms and government. Building trust, I think, is going to be absolutely central. I think that fast, accurate information on the pandemic shared across the member states. So the Parliament and the Commission and the Council working in a stronger way, I take that point very much across the member states, is going to be essential. I think we've learned a lot in the last few months, but we've more to learn. And I think that, finally, I would say that Europe has to stay as a center, or actually maybe regain being a center of innovation, keeping startups in Europe, building up our competitiveness in this new recovery model. Because if we don't do that, it's going to go to China, it's going to go to America, probably more China than America, but we're not keeping enough innovation in Europe. And now we're in this huge crisis, which is going to really make that more difficult. But the one good point I would say is that Europe has been fantastic in terms of responding with money. I mean, there is no shortage of funding at the moment to speak of, although the Horizon program has a threat to its funding at the moment. But, if you can provide the money, provided it's used in the best possible way, and the banks have not been found wanting, except I know small businesses are having some difficulties, but compared to the crisis of 10 years ago, we're in a better position. And there is, more than enough funding is coming through at a European level. And this whole question of own resources and using own resources is very innovative from the Parliament. It's not without its difficulties from the Commission and as well, of course, and the Council. It's not without its difficulties, but it does give a lot of potential to support our businesses, to support innovation, and to have the best practice sharing that we need to have. But I think there's a lot to learn. We've a lot of work to do, and we need to take it incredibly seriously, because otherwise we won't use this crisis in the best possible way for our businesses. Business will have to, and I mean, business, it does undersell itself, but it's going to have to work effectively with us, I think, and the future for business.
Thank you very much for this closing. I say thank you really to this very fruitful and interesting debate. I think at the end, we not only learned a lot, we found also trust in Europe, trust in our SMEs, trust in the future. And I think it's not the end of the debate. And what really should be, this is the starting point, like Mr. Fitzgerald said, that we learned our lessons out of this crisis, and I think Europe will manage this.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.